I don't know, Conrad. I'm really obsessed with this new video game that I have. And
Oh,
I don't know if it's healthy. Um, I literally stayed up till about 2:30 in the morning the other night,
oh wow.
and it was a school night.
That's hardcore.
I mean, I'm not 23, so that the next day I was like, I hate nighttime Melinda. I hate her. She's trying to sabotage my life. But no, Zelda, the new Zelda game is
Ah,
insanely good, and I don't know what it is about that game. I think it's just it's the perfect blend of like stressful when you want it to be stressful, and then you can also just do really dumb side quests, or you can just run around and like collect gems, and there are all these like cheat codes that you can like have 4 billion diamonds if you want to and have all the money in the world. It's amazing.
yeah. And who's your alter ego in this world?
Link.
Link. Okay.
Yeah.
Is he great character to be?
He's kind of, that he never speaks. And so I think that's on purpose so that you can like project yourself onto him. So he's sort of more of a blank slate type character,
Right.
but
Okay.
he's very heroic. But
Okay.
he's not like some big tough guy. I mean, he looks like a little elf, really.
Oh. Okay. See, I'd be worried about hurting him accidentally.
Oh, yeah, well, you'll die. I die. Good amount. That's fine. I got used to
Yeah.
like I had to get over the fear of dying because as an 80s kid, um when you die in a video game, you have to start over.
Mm,
But that's not true anymore, so there's really no consequences to anything.
no, and you can just stay up all night.
Yeah. I mean, there are consequences to that though, I have to say.
Yeah. Once you get past 30, it doesn't work anymore.
No. And like the other problem with playing a video game too much is like you keep it like you do it so much that you start thinking that the powers you have in the video game that you have in your real life, you're just like, I need to use Ultra Hand to like feed the cats. No, I can't do that. It's not working.
Well,
Anyway.
that's a shame. That's a shame. Oh, I'm jealous.
So, welcome to Dreamland, everyone. Uh, my name's Melinda, and I'm joined by my
Conrad.
my lovely co-host Conrad.
It's different every time.
It is, yes. Um, so as we have now announced, the topic today is the DeLorean, and but we had some great topic guesses. We had several people voting for things like the war on drugs and other cocaine references, which is super appropriate.
Yes.
Um, James Salzberg said the Enron, WorldCom, junk bonds, and other Ponzi investment schemes, which would be a really interesting topic for sure, but
Yeah.
kind of a bummer and somewhat hard to make funny, I would think.
Mm.
um, Andrew Devitz just posted a picture of the poster from The Thing. And Ray Goolsby said, this could be interesting. One host focuses on John Carpenter's version, while the other tackles either the original from 51 or the prequel from 2011,
Ooh,
which
yeah, that'd be
might be an
tasty.
interesting way to kind of approach, like, you and I both pick, like, different versions of the same movie.
It could be, but recently Surge of Cold Crash Pictures covered every single adaptation of the thing, comic books, games.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's been done.
Not
If
The
Surge
Thing.
has done
We
it,
could pick something else. Like, we could pick
yeah.
some other weird movie that probably people don't even know is a remake.
Yeah, how about a British movie that got an American remake?
I like that.
That'd be fun.
I know. That would be fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then Matt Cargyle guessed the unbelievably depressing Alf Christmas special, which I have not seen, but now I really want to see it. Although
Yes.
I hate Alf. But,
Yeah, doesn't it have a cat eating thing going on?
yeah.
Yeah, that's not going to go down well in your house.
Yeah. Well, so today we're going to be talking about the story that everyone thinks they know about DeLorean, but we're going to kind of maybe shed some new light, maybe teach you some things or share some things that you weren't aware of and give you some context, which is our favorite thing in the world here is context. And obviously, Michael having a DeLorean, I've been around the car itself for like, God, however long we've been together, 14 years or something like that. Um, and, he's done a lot of reading and research on DeLorean. We've watched documentaries on him over the years. But Conrad, I don't know if you were as familiar with the story going in.
No, I just had this broad outline, which is the outline I'll give you when we begin, pretty much. Just sort of really loose understanding of this character and this car and it being the butt of a joke in a very popular movie. But other than that, I had no idea. And reading about this at great length was was really fascinating, actually. So I'm hoping we'll entertain people with a few tidbits that they didn't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I think you're going to start us off with sort of some background on the man, the myth, the legend that is John DeLorean.
I am indeed, yes. So let's get started with our topic today, Snow Job. Here's what you think you know. And in this case, what I did was I asked ChatGPT to summarize the life and times of John DeLorean. And this is what it came up with. So this is the sort of high-level web summary. John DeLorean was a visionary entrepreneur whose rise through the American automobile industry led to the development of several successful vehicles, including the Pontiac GTO. Frustrated by the strictures of the corporate structure at General Motors, he struck out on his own in 1973 to create the first new car manufacturer since the 1920s, the DeLorean Motor Company, DMC. Its most famous creation was the iconic stainless steel-bodied DMC-12 sports car, known for its distinctive gull-wing doors. Despite significant public interest in this car, DMC was plagued by financial difficulties. That's what ChatGPT said. Mm-hmm. He was arrested for drug trafficking charges as part of an FBI sting operation, and although he was eventually acquitted, the scandal tarnished his reputation. And led to the downfall of DMC, and DeLorean's subsequent attempts to revive his entrepreneurial ventures failed, and he died in relative poverty in 2005. The DMC-12 itself was eventually immortalized by its pivotal role in Robert Zemeckis' blockbusting Back to the Future trilogy and is fondly remembered by a generation as an eye-catching concept car.
Wow, spoiler alert, ChatGPT. All right, well, that's our episode. I'm just kidding.
Okay, bye. Roll credits.
Thanks, AI.
Yeah. It's not quite right, though, is it, Melinda?
Well, I mean, it's the beats are right, I think. I think it's just about, like I said, putting some context on there. And I know, so many people talk about they talk about the DeLorean, and there are two things that come up. It's Back to the Future, usually that's first, and then cocaine or cocaine jokes or something about, and we'll get into all of that, but I just don't know, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on this after having read and watched. I think you've watched several documentaries and you read at least one book about this, and so I don't know. I'm curious what your takeaway is going to be when we get to that.
Yeah. So now we've told you the story that you think you know. Let's tell you what actually happened. So when I was trying to summarize the early life of John DeLorean, the most striking thing for me was just how similar it was to the central figure of our other episode on a successful businessman who came unglued, Ty Warner of Beanie Babies craze. And let's count the ways. So number one, DeLorean had very humble beginnings. He was born 6th of January 1925 in Detroit, Michigan. His mother was Hungarian. His father was Romanian. The latter was described as a violent alcoholic. So the family home was marred by abuse, which sounds quite similar to Time Warner.
Mm-hmm.
The parents divorced when John was in high school, and John lived with his mother until he was 29. Number two, he was popular. Everybody knew who he was, but he didn't seem to have any close friends, which
Mm-hmm.
rings a bell too.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
also was quite a charmer with the ladies. And one frat brother, when they were interviewed, said he would have been voted most likely to succeed and most likely to get into trouble, which is an interesting combo and eerily prescient. He was always in later life popular among reporters for interview, often to the chagrin of his grey-suited executive colleagues who wanted him to disappear into their sea of corporate blandness, and he just refused. He was very showy, and in a particular way he was obsessed with his appearance, Melinda, so much so that he became a fitness fanatic in 1965, boasting about his 31-inch waist. I remember that
Scarlett
fondly.
O'Hara, huh?
And apparently had extensive cosmetic surgery to give himself a square jaw and a thinner bridge of his nose.
I hope he didn't touch those eyebrows. That's all I can say.
Well, yeah, those eyebrows are special. So see if you can spot the difference. Hello, ladies. We should have put a warning on this thread.
Listen, I love that he's got this chest hair that's just enough. It's just a touch, just at the top. It's like it's perfect for when you want to wear your shirt unbuttoned, but it doesn't like go all the way down so that it puffs out, and makes you look chubby. Like it's just like just a little something for the late.
Yeah,
For my
something
gold chains to lay in, like look, he's even wearing the gold chain, I think.
He is, yeah, but it's ridden up a bit, but yeah, it's there. It's there, yeah, something to hang on to.
He's got a real Larry from Three's Company vibe going on. Like he looks like he's going to swinger key parties and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing as a transformation. So, but the portrait on the left is before, the portrait on the right is after. He said that he went face first through a windscreen and had reconstructive surgery, but nobody buys that.
I don't think so. Here's the thing that I noticed. Let's look at the first two pictures. Okay. He looks kind of older in both of the black and white photos than he does when he's shirtless. Like I think we can all agree on that. But when you're looking at the plastic surgery situation, like he literally looks like a different person. Like it doesn't even look like, I don't know what they did, because he already has a very defined chin in the first picture. So it's not just like everyone talks about him getting this chin implant, but I can't quite tell what. I mean, I guess he does have a bigger chin, but
his face is longer.
His whole face looks like they stretched it.
Yeah.
I don't know what they did. Did they put him on the rack, like his face on the rack, just pulled it open?
Might explain the eyebrows, but yeah.
That's where they did the incisions, and then they took some of his scalp hair and just put it there, and then it would just like grow full length hair, and he had to trim his face for the rest of his life.
Possibly. I can visualize that. Well, I'll leave that on the screen. Hopefully it won't be too distracting.
Good.
So another way in which his charm and bedazzling appearance served him well, was he was also a great salesman, like Ty. He got into trouble while attending the Lawrence Institute of Technology in the 1940s because he discovered that Michigan Bell hadn't trademarked its yellow pages. So he started selling advertising to unsuspecting businesses locally to his own yellow pages. He even produced a few copies and was eventually caught and almost was charged, but a lecturer intervened.
Wow.
So, yeah.
What a great scam. I mean, it's not really a scam, but it's kind of a scam. It's a scam.
It's great, yeah. Remember the yellow pages?
Oh my God, yes.
So because of his great salesmanship, he had a rapid rise to success. during which he was quite happy to take the credit for other people's work along the way, here
I
and
mean,
there.
I think he was cut out to be an executive 100%. I mean,
Exactly.
that's literally what they all do.
Quite, yeah. So he was one of the youngest executives to qualify for the coveted bonus pool at Pontiac, where he was hired as head of advanced engineering. So if you
Mm.
remember, I think Ty was earning more than the chief exec at one point in
Mm-hmm.
terms of
Sure.
sales commissions. In 1961, he masterminded the Tempest to help Pontiac get into the small car market. 1962, he's chief engineer at Pontiac, aged 37, which is, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And
Oh, this is before face stretch.
this is before the face stretching, yeah.
Yeah, you can tell.
So 1963, he launches the Tempest GTO, a performance car. The idea to combine a new light body for a car with a high performance engine apparently was that of engineer Bill Collins, but that didn't matter. DeLorean took all the credit because he
Sure.
supplied the marketing pizzazz.
He supplied the eyebrows, Conrad. And to sell this, you really need the eyebrows.
You do, absolutely.
Yeah.
They evaded senior management's dictatum that they not launch a new car line by making the GTO a $300 option package for an existing car line. It was massively popular with the kids.
Mm,
So remember all those other episodes where we've been talking about the emergence of teenagers in the 1960s?
sure.
DeLorean really tapped
Youth
into
culture.
that.
He's like
Yeah.
he's like the Pied Piper of the youth, like calling them with his eyebrows. Just come to me,
Yeah.
children. I will
Yes.
show you the way of cool cars and muscles and weightlifting, gold chains. It's gonna be
And
great.
eyebrows.
It's
It
gonna
is.
be the 70s and you're gonna have a great time.
And he knew how to get to the kids. Two things:
That
television.
sounds really bad, Conrad.
It does, yeah. Sorry. In his car, just whisking them away.
Right.
No. Yep. No, he knew what he was doing with his marketing. He went for TV and he went for music. So he had the Monkees on TV with a custom GTO and a song called GTO by Ronnie and the Daytoners sold 1 million copies. So
Nice.
yeah, really tapped into that youth culture.
Oh, look how cute they are.
They are.
I do love the monkeys, though.
Yeah. In 1972, he became GM's group executive for the car and trucks division at the tender age of 48, but then something seems to have gone horribly wrong. He was out 7 months later, and there are conflicting reports on whether he jumped or was pushed. And because GM was uncharacteristically silent, DeLorean was able to own the story, so he propagated a version, or at least he didn't stop a version propagating, that he became tired of the conformity and lack of innovation at the top of this massive corporation and left to continue his trailblazing work.
Mm-hmm.
But he might actually have been fired, possibly because of his extracurricular business activities that may have resulted in conflicts of interest, or because he was vocally quite critical of GM, in particular a book he co-authored but then his name wasn't on the cover when it was published, and a speech that was magically leaked to reporters that when they looked into it, it looked like he leaked it himself. In any case, he was out of the big corporation in 1973. He went on to form his very own car company, which was quite a trailblazing thing to do at the time, I think.
It was, and it's interesting you talk about conflict of interest because that's also a Ty Warner thing that he had gotten in trouble for and was fired for the
Yes,
exact same thing. So it is clearly a personality type that we
I
have
think so.
identified.
I think so. I think whenever we do something on a captain of industry, we are going to find this eerily similar profiles. But there
Yes.
you go. It's almost as if you have to be a narcissistic sociopath to be a captain of industry, Melinda. Who'd have thought?
I mean, that's really weird, Conrad, and I don't think it matches up with my experience of life at
No,
all.
no,
Mm-mm.
no.
Well, I am going to give now a very quick overview of the car industry, not too in depth because I'm not a car person 100%. I know a little bit about cars, but enough to give you some context. So, um, in I'll get to these in a second, but in 1895, there were starting in 1895, there were at least 1,900 different companies formed making cars because the car was like this new amazing thing, and they were making more than 3,000 makes of cars. But
Wow.
then World War II, like many years pass, World War II happens, the Depression happens, and that gets pared down tremendously, right? And so by the 50s, the industry was mostly the big three, which are General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. And they're all based in, and this is in America, of course. So when I talk about the big three, it means the big three in America. But I'll point out, they are all based in Detroit, and they made 3/4 of all the cars in the world at that time. So they really were worldwide, kind of the big three as well. And then, as I talked about way back in the Burbs episode that we did, there was the passage of the Federal Aid Highway Act of '56, which was it basically created all of our interstate system that we use here in the U.S. and basically enabled families to move out to the suburbs. So you're commuting everywhere you go. You're commuting in to your job and to the grocery store and do all these things, which was great because it like forced great for GM and Ford and Chrysler because it forced families to have to buy cars because you really couldn't exist without having a car. So in 1960, there was a very compact and fuel efficient car called the Nash Rambler, which was the third most popular car in 1960, if you can believe that. I mean,
It's a beauty.
it kind of looks like a suppository. Like,
I don't know. There are quite a few pointy bits in there. I
well,
don't think
but
I'd like to
the
slip that
sides
in.
are just so smooth and like there's no.
I
It's
was
just
thinking upended soap dish for some
okay. That's
reason.
good. Like a big blue bar of soap riding
Yeah,
down the road.
with wheels.
Tiny bubbles. So it's the big three were like, and this was made by Nash, which is like kind of a weird one-off company. So one of the few that was sort of competing with them, right? And so they decided, well, we have to compete with this thing, so we need to make our own compact sized cars. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of what they considered in the early 60s to be compact cars. So we have the 1960 Ford Falcon. We have the 1960 Studebaker Lark, the Chevy Corvair, and the Plymouth Valiant, all from 1960. And they very much look 60s to me. Like they have that, but they are a little bit smaller than like the giant 50s cars, like the Galaxy 500 and like those big, you know, giant.
Speedboats. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Um, so in 1964, pony cars come along. So they're trying to get a little bit sportier, you know. So they start with the Ford Mustang that comes out in '64, and then that's followed by the Chevy Camaro, the Pontiac Firebird, and the Plymouth Barracuda. And so you can see the lines of some of like the cooler cars that we get as we move into the later '60s and into the '70s, like the American style car. So these are pony cars. A pony car being defined as a sporty compact car with a small block V8 or even a V6 engine. So not necessarily the most powerful engine and maybe not the fastest cars, but sporty and kind of cool. And then that was also the same year that muscle cars came out. And you kind of already talked about this a little bit. So we had the Pontiac GTO, which was the DeLorean vehicle that had that option, you know, that you talked about earlier.
Hmm.
And you've got the Chevy Chevelle and the Dodge Corin, or the Dodge Charger rather, and then the Plymouth Roadrunner. So, and these cars, of course, will continue to evolve. And in the '70s, like the Charger and the Roadrunner get a lot cooler, in my opinion. But these are muscle cars, and muscle cars just have more power. That's why they're called muscle cars. So they're usually bigger a little bit. They have a big block V8, and they do really well in like drag races and stuff like that, as opposed to like hugging corners and doing like any kind of curves. Not when you're going fast in a muscle car. They can go really fast in one direction, but not super like stuff you would see in European racing, right? Like that's not what these cars are designed for.
Okay.
And then Corvettes were also changing. I just wanted to kind of point those out too. These are still considered just sports cars. They're not considered pony cars or muscle cars, because these do allegedly hug the road a little bit more while you're driving and have better ability to do tight turns at higher speeds. Now, I've been in a few Corvettes, and I did not find that to be the case, but maybe it was just the particular car I was in. But anyway, those were sort of like, this is kind of where we were going with cars at this time. So, let's see. Government regulations also started increasing in the 60s. So the lap seat belts were mandated in a lot of places starting in 1962. And then there was this book that came out by Ralph Nader called Unsafe at Any Speed, which basically talked about a lot of the dangers of the American automobile and like how their safety stuff was just really, really lacking. And so that led to what they call the malaise era of car design, which is sort of synonymous with very poor performance from 1973 to 1983. In the 70s, we also had really high gas prices and a lot more foreign auto competition coming in. The Carter administration started doing a lot more safety stuff, and the domestic automakers started doing a lot more compact and subcompact cars to try to deal with like all of these things, meaning the safety and the fuel shortages. So you have things like the Ford Pinto and the AMC Gremlin and the Chevy Vega and the Ford Maverick. So a lot less sexy, but a lot more fuel efficient, and but certainly not safer, especially if you're talking about a Pinto. So so and then in 1979, that is, I believe, when that book that you discussed a moment ago came out, the Insider Account book, which was called On a Clear Day, You Can See General Motors. He had begun writing that with a co-author, as you mentioned, in 1973. And I just wanted to read really quickly from the dust jacket. It says, as the antithesis of the traditional stodgy, dark-suited GM executive, DeLorean operated with flair and panache. He openly criticized his company and his industry when he felt they deserved it. He avoided the corporate social scene in favor of a cadre of friends that included professional athletes and movie stars, and he dated models and actresses who were often younger than the daughters of his fellow executives. And people that
Ew.
he did date. Yeah, right? Like he married like a teenager as well at one point. So he dated Raquel Welch and Ursula Andress and Nancy Sinatra and even Candice Bergen. So all very well-known, very attractive women of the time. So the initial groundbreaking idea for his car was that it should be economical, affordable, immediately recognizable and distinct, and a sports car. So like a two-seater sports car. It's definitely not a muscle car like the GTO. It is a sports car. The first prototype in 1976 was completed by William Collins, the former chief engineer at Pontiac, who just passed away apparently in March. It was initially called the DSV-1, which is hilariously stands for the DeLorean Safety Vehicle. But that was changed to DMC-12, and the 12 relating to the target list price of $12,000 on release, which was not what it sold for. It was like over double that. It was like 25,000. And that's 25,000 is about 70,000 in today's money, and the price was raised to 29,000 in 82 and 34,000 in 83, and it made it really hard for people to, feel like it was a good investment, because you could get a Corvette at the same time for about $16,000. So, but but they did do their best to have ads. So you have things like Goodyear, quality a man can stake his reputation on, and the DeLorean, live the dream. So, and then I love this image of a DeLorean on, like, it looks like the Price is Right, like a showcase
Yes.
showdown type of situation with the lovely
Yeah.
blonde lady going, "Look what you could win."
Yeah, and a bow on it. It's,
Oh, it's so
it's
cute.
it's priceless. I love how so much of this advertising is built around him. It's not the
Oh yeah.
car. It's
No,
it's you're buying into a lifestyle, an image, aren't you?
100%. Yeah. The
Yeah.
image of, like, this jet-setting executive who, works by day and parties by night. And, you know, one of the things that Michael has told me, and it made me laugh so hard, is like the little, it's not a back seat, but there's like a little shelf behind the seats. And it was literally designed, and he insisted on it being an exact size because it had to be the exact size that would fit golf clubs, because he's thinking that, like, business executives are going to be taking their golf clubs with them, and then going to play some golf. Like, he had his target audience, like, in mind, right?
Right.
um so the let's see, DeLorean Motor Company made about 9,200 cars between 1981 and 82, all in its factory in Belfast, Ireland. They produced enough parts to support 10 years worth of production, because they really like to produce stuff, and expected to make about 25,000 cars per year. And that is why you occasionally hear that you can get a brand new DeLorean, because it's just essentially a car that's made from all the spare parts. So it's not going to be one that was like a 1981 or 82 DeLorean that was made in Ireland. It's just going to be like a parts car. Doesn't mean it's not a
Oh.
DeLorean, but it's just different. So you'll see these articles like, you can get a brand new DeLorean. And technically that's
Wow.
true, but that's what it's talking about. So
So
don't be
can you
fooled.
buy like a kit, like, a Lego car and build your own DeLorean at
You
home?
do not want to do that.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. But so the components in these cars were in a constant state of flux and what they called rolling changes. Okay. They're too numerous to entirely cover here, but I did want to hit on several of them. Initial plans included a lot of unproven materials, which were found to be unusable during the initial production. So they were trying to be so innovative that they were using stuff that no one had ever used. And it's like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. Um, so one example is the engine. So initially it was supposed to be a Ford V6, and then they changed it to the complete drivetrain from the Citroen CX 2000, which was deemed a more reliable choice. But then they found that that was underpowered for the car. So they eventually went with a fuel injected V6 PRV engine, which stands for Peugeot Renault Volvo. So it's a Volvo engine V6. And that meant that they had to relocate the engine, just because the way the engine is structured, from the mid engine to the rear engine. So that's why it's in the back.
Ah,
So
okay.
all of these things are happening during the early development of the car. And every time you change one of these things, there are all these ripple effects of, like, well, if we move this here, then we have to move all these things over here. And then that makes this not work. And then da 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 da. Um, so it was felt that almost a complete re-engineering was needed by the time they made some of these key changes. And that's when DeLorean brought in the English engineer Colin Chapman, who founded Lotus Cars. And he replaced lots of those revolutionary materials and things that were problematic with ones that they were already using at Lotus. And after a bunch of delays, the production began in the Dunmurry factory near Belfast in late 1980, and the first car off the line was 21st January of 1981. So some of the production changes, I'm just going to go through really quickly to show you what they look like. So the most obvious one that I've seen on these cars is the hood. So the very first cars had the hood has like two grooves running down either side from the windshield down to the headlights. And then on the driver's side, right by the windshield wiper, you have a little flap that you can open. That's where you put the gas in the car. So it's a gas
Oh,
flap.
I thought it was going to be golf balls.
Well, that would be great. I mean, uh, and so the next one, the style lines remain, but they remove the gas flap. So in order to fill up in most cars, because the first 2,700 cars had the gas flap, and then after that they no longer have the gas flap. So anything after that, you have to lift the hood to put gas in the car.
Oh,
So yeah, so the second one ran through the end of 1981, and it just has the two grooves running down the front. And then the flat top, we call it the skillet top here in our house, but the last like 2,300 cars is it's sort of completely flat, and it has the word DeLorean up on the driver's side right by the headlight. And so those are the only ones that are available as new original stock. So if you get a new DeLorean, it's going to have this hood.
oh. I don't like that hood as much.
I know. Well, the one in the movie is the number two style, the one
Right.
without the gas flap, but doesn't have the word on it. So that's the kind that Michael has, because he wanted his car to be the same as the one in the movie, but without all of the added on stuff to it.
Well, yeah, of course.
And so another thing that happens is, so John DeLorean was very tall. He was over 6 feet tall. And so for him to close the gull-wing doors was not a problem, right? He just reached up and pulls them down. But if you're me, you cannot reach them if you're sitting in the car. So, and neither could Michael J. Fox. Uh, just as a side note, not that that was the reason why they added this, but people found, like when they started making the car, they were like, oh, well, if you're short, you cannot pull these down. So they added like a little strap that you put into the door handle to make it reachable. And then later on, after the first 5,500 cars or so, they added a built-in pull strap, which is a lot nicer, right? Like it looks a little bit more custom and nice.
Yeah.
Um, so the antenna is a weird thing. So the very first one of those weird innovative things they came up with actually made it into the final version of the car, and it was an antenna that is like part of the windshield. So the windshield itself is the antenna of the car,
Oh.
but it didn't work.
Oh.
So you couldn't, and this was the 80s, right? So you really relied on your radio. And so you basically didn't have a radio. So when they got the cars on the boat
Oh.
and they brought them over to America, they just started like punching holes into the stainless and put in like a straight up and down antenna. So you can see that on the front fender mounted antenna that goes on the passenger side in the front, in this image that I'm showing. And then later
Mm.
on, they found a more discreet way. So they have a retractable antenna that fits inside of the louvers that are sort of on the back of the car, on the side window, not on the very back. And it sort of like a little antenna comes out and then it goes back in, until it breaks. And then it
Okay.
sort of halfway sticks out. So like Michael just removed his from his car because it was like, this is something that's going to break. It's going to break down. So anyway, that's another kind of oddity that you'll see. The wheels initially were just gray, very plain gray, and then they eventually painted them silver, and right in the center there's like a little circle that says DMC, and they painted that black to kind of make that pop out a little bit more. And then you've got like this armrest initially that is sort of like attached on there, and when you rest your arm on it at all, it pulls away from the side. So
Oh.
in the second iteration, they just molded it into like the foam so that it's just again more custom built in, looking kind of like the pull strap.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh, did you have a question?
Well, I was just wondering. So, did it detach completely originally, so you could use it as a weapon, maybe? Or
Or store cocaine in it? Just kidding.
yeah.
No.
No.
No, I just think it starts to look like it's,
Tearing
droopy
away.
drawers. It's not
Right.
appealing.
Nasty.
Um, so this was a really weird one. So the cars, again, they get made in Ireland, they get put on boats, they're shipped over to the US. And there was this law that had just been passed not that long before, I believe, that a car had to be a certain height, because if it was too low to the ground, then it could run up underneath the back of like a truck, and it would be catastrophic, right? So it was a safety reg. And so they're like, well, that's not how the car is designed. The car was designed to sit low to the ground. Well, they made them raise it up by, I think it's like 6 inches or maybe even a little bit more. And so they if you can see it. Like I wish I had a picture of them like that showed the tires, because there's a gap between the top of the tire and like the curve of the metal that goes over where the tire is, that's like
Yeah.
way too high. So it looks like the car is like sticking its little head up all the time like this. Um, so the one in the center here on the screen is Michael's car, and you can see him there, sort of in almost in shadow. But we lowered the car back down to its original height, and so you can definitely see when you look at the one that's right behind it how much lower it is to the ground.
Yeah.
Um, so
So does that mean that you're breaching a safety regulation at this point,
I
or?
think at this point you can make these cars be what they were because they're considered antique vehicles, and so there's like a loophole.
Oh, okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Uh, and so there are a couple of these are just options. So this was like the interior color. You've got black on the first thousand cars, couple thousand cars, and then gray started in 1981 as an option alongside black. Um, and there's also an optional thing that people do where they get the letters that are on the back bumper that, it says DeLorean, but it's just sort of like imprinted into the bumper. And so people
Mm.
buy these metal letters that come on like a sheet and then they stick them in there. But I don't think they
Oh,
came from
okay.
the factory that way. I think it looks a little goofy myself, but some people seem to really like it. They may think it makes it pop. So, um, also, really quick, I wanted to go back to this. So, do you see on this car in the front where right above the headlights, it's almost like they have their own eyebrows? Like
Yes.
the plastic is kind of like coming up right there.
Yeah, is that John DeLorean's signature style?
It's actually warping from being outside. So
Oh.
uh, you want a car if you're buying a car, one of these cars, you definitely want to find one that's been garaged, like and not left out in the heat, because you
Oh.
will get
Oh.
plastic. All this is plastic, so it just warps.
So what do you do when you're parking it on a hot day? Do you stand over it with an umbrella the whole time?
It can stay out there for like a few hours, but you just don't
Right.
want it to be left out there for years. And at this point, we're
Okay.
talking many, many years, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Um, so I know some people have been asking about, wanting Michael's take, which is totally fair because he's the owner of the DeLorean. So I think we should hear from him. And I asked him, what's it like to actually drive a DeLorean? So now I'm going to let Michael tell us in his own words what it's like to drive a DeLorean.
Driving a DeLorean. Well, there are pros to it and there are cons to it. As far as your per dollar spend on any car, you'll never get more attention than you will in a DeLorean. You can have $250,000 Lamborghini or some sort of Mercedes SLS, and you still won't get the attention that you get when you pull up in a DeLorean. It's one of, if not the most recognizable cars in the world. It is probably the most famous car in history at this point, due with all deference to Back to the Future. But as far as driving the car on a daily basis or a regular basis, you forget that even though the DeLorean was so ahead of its time, that even when you sit down in it today,
Oh, have we lost him?
It literally broke my entire computer to do that. I don't know why. Did you
Oh,
hear
wow.
any of that?
Yes, to begin with. Yeah. We had the first part of it. I'm not sure why that
Okay.
stopped. That's very strange. And it's just me now. How's everyone doing?
Are you there?
Yes.
I broke everything.
Wow. That's a first.
I know. It's like like I'm a DeLorean.
It's the curse of the DeLorean.
It is the curse of the DeLorean. All right. Well, so I am going to not finish playing that one. Were you able to hear any of it? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Yeah, we could hear the first part of it. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I can try to play it again, or we can just keep moving. I think we should just keep moving for the time being.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, apologies, guys. Let me just get back to the right slide. Let's see. I'm close. All right. So, things that you may not expect about being in a DeLorean. So, one of the things is that the US law at the time that they were made mandated that the speedometer only goes to 85 miles per hour. So, on the left, you see an actual DeLorean speedometer. And on the right, I pulled a screen grab from the movie, which I'm not sure. I'm sure Michael could tell you what car that was taken from, but that's definitely not an actual DeLorean speedometer.
Wait, so it couldn't actually do 88, or it?
No. Well, I mean, let me just tell you
Okay.
something. I don't know if a DeLorean could go 88, but I can tell you I wouldn't want to be going 88 in a DeLorean
Right. Okay.
because they're very prone to catching fire.
Oh my. Okay.
So, like, getting it really hot and, does not sound like a great.
The DeLorean can go over 88, 90, and even 100. The idea was that the 85 limit would keep people from.
You have to come over here and just say it. They can't hear you.
The DeLorean can actually go over 90 and 100. The trick back then was they thought that if they limited the speedometer itself to 85 miles an hour, people wouldn't try to see how fast their cars could go, and therefore highways would be safer and fuel efficiency would be better. But yeah, the DeLorean can go 88 and a lot faster than that. It's not a Ferrari, but it can go faster than 88.
Yes.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay.
Thank you for that context. The speedometer can't go 88 though.
No, but it would give you that lovely feeling like Spinal Tap that you'd be going up to 11.
Which is in the movie too, right?
Yes.
Almost.
Almost.
All right. So another thing is that because, like I said, even before you lower your car, if you do that, it's a very low car. It sits really close to the ground. So the thing that struck me the first time I sat in it was I feel like I'm about 6 inches off the ground, and the seats are like leaned back, like, and you can't. They're adjustable with these knobs, like, so you can lean it almost. It's about as adjustable as an airline seat. Okay, so it doesn't move very much, and so, like, as a short person, like, I cannot see over the front of the car. Like, I feel like a little child sitting in a car, like, trying to look over the hood of the car. Like, I can't see anything in it because I'm laid back and I'm, like, on the ground. It feels like you're riding down the road in your bed. And the seats are leather, so, like, you will kind of slide down a little bit as well. So it's
Lovely.
It's kind of this whole thing. Like, it's got, so the frame and the way that it's made is it's a fiberglass pontoon that sits on an I-beam. And so, like, imagine like a capital I that's laid down on the ground, and then you've got this fiberglass pontoon that sits on top of that. So it can kind of go like left and right? And if you sit in it and you weigh a lot, then it's just going to, like, crack or bow over like this. It's literally not designed. It's even in the spec manual that I have. I have this, and I say I have it. Of course, Michael has it, but this is the workshop manual. We have, like, several of these books that just luckily happened to be in the hood of the car when Michael purchased it.
Wow.
And it talks about the maximum weight limit is 400 pounds.
Okay.
And
I hear tell that there are some Americans who are a little bit over that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have, like, two adults, even who are just big muscular dudes, and they weigh like 225, you're technically going over the weight limit. And it only becomes a problem when you're like, yeah, well, it can become a problem in situations like if you take the car to a car show and people don't understand that. And there's no delicate way to say that to somebody either, because you don't want to be rude and you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But, you know, if somebody who weighs like 300 pounds, like sits down in your car, it can break your car, and it's very expensive and it's difficult to repair. And so another thing is you may be, once you're in the car, it's kind of hard to get out of the car because you're very low to the ground and there's nothing to grab onto because the door is up. And so the first thing people do, because we've seen people do this, is they grab onto the edge of the windshield and they pull on it to pull themselves up out, which warps the windshield and can warp the frame of your car. And other people, if they're in the driver's side, they'll grab onto the steering wheel and pull themselves out with it. The thing is none of these things are good ideas. So don't ever pull on anything on a DeLorean. Like, just don't do it. Like, push out. But, you know, I have literally, depending on what I was wearing, just kind of like almost wanted to roll out of the car onto the ground and then just stand up that way.
Classy. This is one of my favorite things, is like the only people that can afford these kinds of cars, sports cars, are, you know, men that are my age and north of my age. And at this point, functioning knees are just not a feature of your life anymore.
Right,
so
exactly.
Getting in and out of them, you've just got these slightly overweight, balding men just rolling out onto the sidewalk from these cars that are just far too low. Yes. It's hilarious, but I enjoy it very much.
Another weird thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is the fact that the windows on a DeLorean are not functional in the sense of like a full window that rolls down. So there are instances where, like, if you're parked on a hill or something like that, there are these stories of like people's doors getting stuck shut. So if you're inside the car and the door is stuck shut, you cannot lower the window and climb out because you have this toll booth window here, which was made just to sort of like, I think it was a Lotus thing. That's something that they have on their cars. And that was sort of the fix for like how to make these doors, because it's part of the gull wing. There's no room inside the door for the window to go down inside fully. And so they have this little bitty window that goes up and down with a, you know, switch. But I mean, you can't climb out of it. So you're kind of stuck in a hot metal box, like until you can find a way out.
And there's no sunroof, right?
No.
So
no, you can't because the doors are right there. So
it's a potential death trap.
Could be. Michael was pointing out that, you know, it's designed so that if the car flips over on its roof, which then of course you wouldn't be able to open the doors, you're supposed to kick out the windshield. And my whole thing is, like, if you're Michael and you're 6'3", which is how tall John DeLorean was as well, like, how are you getting your legs up there in the car? So, like, do that.
Well, that's why you marry a teenager in stilettos, clearly.
That's a great point, Conrad. It's really a safety feature.
Teenager in stilettos.
For sure.
Comes with every model.
That sounds like a Morrissey song.
It really does.
Like the
I think
Smiths.
I've invented one.
Teenager in stilettos. Okay. Sorry. All right, and I would play the next clip, but I'm kind of afraid to do it, so I'm going to instead just show you some of the problems with the car. I certainly can't go into every possible problem with this car. There's a lot of problems that come from like the Lucas electrical system, which is notorious for being, you know, problematic in terms of like all of your interior lights will just go off. Like electrical things will just all stop working. You're constantly chasing those gremlins. This is a photo of me from back in around 2011, working on the car. We had just washed the car, and then we were replacing the seal around the hood, like the trunk in the front, the bonnet, I guess, to make sure it's sealed correctly so that water wouldn't get into it. And so these were all just things from back in 2012 that Michael had already done to the car, which he got in 2009. So this is just part of a very long list of things that he had done at that point, and that was like over 10 years ago. So lots of things.
Yeah, so it's kind of a lifelong project, a DeLorean.
Yes. You're constantly working on it. It's one of those things where, like, if one little piece of rubber starts to rot or doesn't work well, or a seal is messed up inside the engine or any of those things, then it causes like that ripple effect that we talked about earlier. And so you're chasing that. So like you flush the coolant lines, but then 5 other things break because you did that. And then you realize that you have to replace all these hoses and then all these seals and then all this. And you're just like, ah!
Yeah.
So anyway.
It's a labor of love, I guess. If you're going to own one, you're going to feel strongly about it and look after it, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. So I think now we're going to talk a little bit about the whole Ireland situation.
Yes, because it takes an enormous amount of capital investment to build a new car manufacturer from scratch. You'll be surprised to hear, Melinda. DeLorean's search for investors was pretty fruitless, so it led him to government funding. And after a brief flirtation with Puerto Rico, in fact, I think it was more than a flirtation. I think he essentially left them at the altar. I think they were waiting for him to return their call. He eventually took £80 million. This is back when pounds actually were worth something, mind, from the British government to build his factory in Northern Ireland. Now, you may know that the 80s in Northern Ireland was not
really
the
fun,
greatest,
really
not
fun
the
place
greatest.
to hang out.
No, it's not the time when you sort of like
Enya and like
Enya and pubs and singing. No, that's
okay.
That's not what was happening in 1982. I'm sorry to say, it was the height of the Troubles, which is a fairly innocuous and misleadingly gentle-sounding word for a war that cost the lives of about 3,500 people between the late 60s and the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And because the two sides are obviously, well, not obviously, but they are often described as Catholics and Protestants, you might be led to believe that it was a religious dispute, but it wasn't. It was actually our fault. It was a nationalist war focused on whether Northern Ireland should remain part of the UK, which was the view of the Unionists, who were mostly Protestants, or join a united Ireland, which was the view of the Republicans, who were mostly Catholics. Right. And this resulted in a clash between paramilitary groups like the Irish Republican Army, IRA, you'll be familiar with, as well as the British Army and police. And it featured many really quite terrifying things. There were hunger strikes in prisons, there was rioting, shootings, assassinations, and terrorist bombings, some of them in England, in the mainland. So prominent examples were the Hyde Park bombing and the Brighton Hotel bombing. And that's, if you Google it, oddly enough, if you Google IRA bombings, it's all the mainland that comes up, which just shows the bias in England, really. And that's not to underplay it, because as a kid in the 80s, you were afraid that it was in the back of your mind that if you walked into a pub, it might explode. But to be honest, the overwhelming majority of the casualties were in Belfast, now to be the site of the new and exciting DeLorean Motor Car Company. As part of the deal, DeLorean had to build his factory smack bang in the middle of no man's land between predominantly Catholic and Protestant areas, as you can see in this map. And in some ways it was a bit of a social experiment, because although there were separate entry doors for the two different groups of workers, during the working day, of course, naturally, there were just hundreds of employees, thousands at one point, who were just working shoulder to shoulder to achieve something together and taking great pride in it. So it was seen as a massive boost to an area that, for obvious reasons, struggled to attract investment and suffered from 33% employment at the worst of times.
Wow.
And so DeLorean became this white knight, this great figure of hope for the area. He was quite revered. Unfortunately, he got the funding from the pro-worker left wing, I dare hesitate to say it because I know it's a dirty word over there, Socialist Labour Party.
Yes.
So roughly the equivalent of the Democrats, but a little bit more up the workers and go unions.
Sure.
In 1979, however, the UK decided to sort of swing in a slightly different direction.
I mean, not too far in the other direction, though, right?
Not just a smidge over to
just
far right-wing party under the auspices of Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative government. Now, Margaret was many, many, many things. Keen on workers, she was not. And certainly not unions, and certainly not throwing taxpayer money after risky car investments. She stuck with it for a while when the factory was damaged to the tune of £450,000 during some rioting. DeLorean asked the UK government for $14 million to repair the damage. And they sort of went along with it to a certain point. But then DeLorean's secretary, who was an English lady, Marion Gibson, decided to pick up all the files she could and march straight to the Daily Mirror to expose DeLorean's extravagant lifestyle, which appeared to be on the UK taxpayers' dime.
Is that headline that says Playboy World Crashes, is that a different story? Or is that...
That's
DeLorean?
Not the one.
Okay.
No, that's not. It's Why I Told on Car Tycoon. And you'll note that I'm showing you page 1 and pages 4 and 5 of the Daily Mirror. I cannot show you page 3 because of the grand tradition in the UK around about this time of having a young lady in a state of disrobement.
Really?
On page 3. Page
Very
3,
nice,
girls.
Daily Mirror. Way to go.
Classy. Yeah.
Keeping it classy over there.
Yeah.
Can
they
I
only stopped this very recently.
Well, that's a bummer. Hey, can you go back one slide? I have a theory.
Okay. Yep.
So I think I have a theory why she hated DeLorean so much. Can you guess what it is?
No. Lack of eyebrows?
Eyebrow envy.
Yes, I think it could be right. She's plucked them to nothing there, hasn't she?
Bless her heart. Even Elizabeth's over there looking at her going, I have better eyebrows than you. Anyway, sorry. Just an observation, just a theory. I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah, you may have hit on something there. Yeah. You'll be not surprised to learn that the idea that an American is spending taxpayers' money to fund an extravagant lifestyle did not go down well.
Or helping the Ireland people, probably also not popular with them either, right?
Well, no, not after the bombings, not so much.
Right.
No. Thatcher asked Scotland Yard to investigate. Nothing came of it, possibly because production at DMC was at its highest at that point. But then it turned out that sales of the car were underwhelming. It just wasn't shifting. They were just stacked up at the docks with nowhere to go. And Thatcher pulled the plug on further funding. DeLorean later claimed that it was because she discovered that workers were tithing to the IRA, which essentially means that UK taxpayers' money was just funding terrorism. Based on everything.
I mean, funny, but kind of funny. Like
yeah, kind of ironic, but yeah. Everything I've seen, all the documentaries, everything I've read, I can't see any evidence of that. It just feels like a justification that DeLorean made up in his own head. But
Yeah.
Maybe it's true. Maybe it factored in. I don't know. But I think she knew a bad investment when she saw one, so she pulled the plug.
Sure.
And this meant that poor John DeLorean had to find an alternative way to fund his dream. What did he do, Melinda?
Well, so he was this kind of person who was very resourceful and believed in himself a lot.
Yes.
And he was really, really good at kind of reading the room. And that room could be like a literal room, or it could be like the room of like a whole group of people, like a metaphorical room. Like, and so he was really good at telling you what you wanted to hear to get you to like do the things that he wanted you to do. Even if he didn't believe what he was saying, his goal was to like get you to give him money or get you to whatever. And so he was kind of like a really good persuasion person, right? And so I'm saying all of that with a reason behind it. So I want to go to, here we go. The war on drugs. The war on drugs, I'm just going to kind of give you everyone a little bit of context again about like where we were when DeLorean was doing what he was doing. So it officially began in June of 71 when Richard Nixon declared drug abuse to be public enemy number one. And he increased federal funding for drug control agencies and drug treatment efforts. And historically in America, we've had a crap ton of laws related to controlling different drugs and substances. So in 1914, we had the first one of these, which was the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, which regulated opiates and coca products. So this is when they pulled cocaine out of Coca-Cola, even though Coca-Cola says that that never happened, like that never contained it, but it super did. And there were like also all of these, you know, snake oil type things that you could buy at roadsides and stuff that had cocaine in them, essentially like for toothaches and all kinds of stuff like that. So that put a stop to that in 1914. Okay.
Feels a bit extreme for toothache.
Well, it's probably a small dose. Like you rub it on your gums and it
Okay.
like numbs, like cocaine will numb your gums.
Oh, okay.
Fun side effect.
Yeah, and you get a screenplay idea.
Yeah. And
just
you
a
never
bonus.
shut up. You just never stop talking. My tooth feels better and I have a lot of ideas. I'm going to tell all of them to you right now. The 18th Amendment, of course, passed in 1919, followed by the Volstead Act in 1920, which essentially was prohibition. That all got repealed in 1933, but we had a fun few years there where alcohol was a drug, which, I mean, it kind of is, but it was like treated the same as we think of drugs today. In 1930, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was established. That eventually is going to turn into the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency that we know today. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed. You'll notice that it's spelled differently than we spell it today. And that is like on purpose because they changed the marijuana to have a J in it to sort of associate it with Mexico. And, you know, sort of, there's a lot to the war on drugs that I'm not going to go into, but that sort of gives you a glimpse of kind of what some of the messaging around it is. But scholars note that the Marijuana Tax Act, as you notice, all of these are tax acts, right? So they're about money. And the scholars note, a lot of them do, that this was most likely pushed forward, this tax act, by wealthy businessmen, including Mellon, which is like Carnegie Mellon, that really rich guy, Hearst with all of his newspapers, and DuPont, who had like this great invention of nylon. They wanted to destroy the hemp industry, right? Because it was a cheap alternative to timber, which they used to make newspapers, and nylon holdings. So it was sort of these very wealthy businessmen getting together to like kill something that they didn't like. And then 1970, you get the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, which categorized controlled substances based on medicinal use and potential for addiction. So that's what we have in place now. It's been modified, but essentially you've got like Schedule 1, 2, 3, and 4 drugs, and like how addictive are they? How much do they need to be controlled? Like, is it something like aspirin or is it something like fentanyl? You know. And then in 1980, of course, Reagan becomes president, and his administration expanded the federal focus on prosecuting offenders. So where Nixon was sort of wanting to make drugs public enemy number one, Reagan wanted to make drug dealers and drug users public enemy number one. And so he expanded a lot of the penalties in the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 84 towards possession of cannabis, established a federal system of mandatory minimum sentences, which we hear about a lot here, and established procedures for civil asset forfeiture. So you could, have all of your property seized and all this kind of stuff if you have stuff to do with drugs, which is an interesting thing to think about in terms of like the people who hated DeLorean. I'm not saying that there's like a definite conspiracy of like the car people setting him up necessarily, but these folks really didn't like John DeLorean, and that's and he couldn't get funding to have his car company located in the US, which is why part of the reason why he looked outside the US to get a location to have his factory and all that kind of stuff. And so I just think that it's a perfect storm of really bad things that are being set up, and Reagan really wanted, and not just Reagan but his team, his people around him knew that this drug thing was coming, and they wanted to have some very high profile arrests to show to the people, hey, drugs are a big problem, we want you to see it. And so when we get to your section that's coming up right now and we literally see it on camera, I feel like that's very intentional.
Yes. Yeah. Well, one of the things that the long prison sentences associated with the war on drugs didn't deter smugglers so much as create a cottage industry of informants who are willing to turn in a bigger fish in order to reduce their sentence. And in a lot of cases, they had to kind of invent one because they, maybe they didn't know one. In that context, I'd like to introduce you to a man called James Timothy Hoffman, who used to be DeLorean's neighbor, and he was a drug smuggler, and he was caught, and he was facing such a sentence. So he offered up his ex-neighbor as a potential target because he knew he was desperate for cash, and he approached DeLorean with the promise of raising a lot of money fast, which of course was
Sounds
attractive. Great.
Where do we start?
It sounds fantastic. Here is a very, very blurry picture because secret filming back in 1982 was not great. Kind of looks like Bill Shatner, doesn't it? But
it kind of does. Like, yeah, a little bit.
It's not, but apparently that is DeLorean and James Timothy Hoffman. And he's telling him there that he has some Colombian investors who will be able to help DeLorean raise an awful lot of money fast. Desperate, DeLorean went along with it, but wouldn't you know it, he quickly became rather suspicious as to where this money was coming from. He sought advice from the DMC corporate attorney, Tom Kinnelly, who told him to stall as much as he could. But Hoffman then made a thinly veiled threat that DeLorean's daughter would be killed if he backed out. So he carried on meeting up with him. That particular detail was revealed when DeLorean took a polygraph test. So that's a bit dark and disturbing.
Yes.
And where this is all headed is October 19th, 1982, DeLorean is in a hotel room with a bunch of undercover federal agents, apparently in the midst of financing a $24 million cocaine smuggling deal. On video, he I think, when I listen to it, nervously remarks that the suitcase of coke that's just been plonked in front of him looked, quote unquote, better than gold. And then he toasted his companions with champagne and wished everybody a lot of success. Shortly afterwards, he was arrested and charged with a whole slew of drug smuggling crimes. And yes, he ended up in court. Larry Flint, this feels like a completely spurious detour. Larry Flint, who you will all know from The People versus Larry Flint with Woody Harrelson, or at least that's how I know him, publisher of Hustler, for some reason was really excited to get this video out to the public. And he paid a law clerk $5,000 for the video and gave it to CBS News, who aired it in October 1983. There was an awful lot of concern that a fair trial would now be impossible. So Larry ended up in a lot of trouble about this, and he thought that he would show up to court when he was charged in a diaper made out of an American flag.
Yeah.
Which
That's Larry.
That's Larry. Yeah. So I was aware that letting the flag touch the ground was bad. I didn't realize that letting it touch your taint was not good, because he was charged with desecrating the American flag. I think they let him off everything else, but he was charged and fined for that.
I think he pled guilty to that one, so he didn't get in more trouble with something else, if memory serves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea why this is in there, but this is just one of those details in this story that's just impossible to resist. So,
It is pretty juicy. It's like this whole story, and like, some of those people who were in the room with DeLorean in that previous image that you had, one of those guys was legit a drug smuggler that was still actively a drug smuggler that the FBI was also trying to nail, like two birds with one stone type of deal. So like John DeLorean saying that he was nervous, like the guy is kind of intimidating. Like you can watch the video and like what they're saying in it and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And I do want to make the point, because they kind of make this point in some of the documentaries that are out there, like, but there's no reason for the cocaine to be in the room other than a photo op, because John DeLorean essentially is giving them stocks in his company, DeLorean Motor Company, which at this point has already been in receivership for like 8 or 9 months or something like that. And the stock is worthless. Like it's been seized. It hasn't been fully closed, but it's been seized by the British government. And so he knows that it doesn't have any value. And so then one of these banker guys literally gives John DeLorean the money to give to the drug guy. So John DeLorean is not even giving them any money. He's just there like saying, I'll give you stock and whatever. It doesn't even make any sense. And so that is really why, like, yes, he was entrapped, but he also didn't pay anybody for drugs. And he was never even supposed to, within the deal, the drug smuggler guy was going to be the one who distributed the drugs as well. So John was really just trying to get the money. Like they're going to get the drugs, sell the drugs at a markup, and then make a profit. And then John was getting some of the money. It doesn't make a lot of sense, really. But the point is that there was no reason for John to ever see or touch the cocaine other than, like, we need a really great visual to show a jury.
Yeah. Exactly. So the trial began 5th of March 1984. It lasted 22 weeks. Prosecutors tried desperately to paint DeLorean as this corporate drug smuggler disguised as a businessman. Right. But his defense countered with the tale of an overreaching government entrapping a desperate man. And it didn't help that upon cross-examination, their star witness, Hoffman, made it obvious that he'd repeatedly lied just to land a big fish.
Yeah.
The agent accompanying Hoffman at the time of the DeLorean arrest, a guy called Benedict Teaser, which is a great name, revealed under cross-examination that he knew DeLorean didn't want to participate in a drug deal. And Teaser was later berated by a senior Department of Justice official about being so honest in his testimony, unaware that they were on an open mic and being overheard by a room full of reporters.
Oh my God. It feels like that happened recently in some other big profile case where the only other time I can think of that happening is, I don't know if you remember like the whole Nancy Kerrigan, Tanya Harding incident,
Oh,
but
yeah.
like Nancy Kerrigan got really mad that the Ukrainian girl won that year, first place, and they couldn't find her national anthem, and so she's talking smack about the country and the lady who won, and Oksana Bayol was her name, and the mic picked it up, and it's like on air, like on CBS or whoever was broadcasting the competition, and it's like, oh, Nancy, not a good look, super
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, I love a hot mic.
I do
It's
too.
one of
I
my
do
favorite
too.
things. So, yes, the jury acquitted DeLorean on the 16th
Much
of
like
August,
Ty Warner.
1984. Yes, yes, much like Ty Warner. So, shocker, rich white man gets away with it. But I really do think, from everything I've seen, yes, he was willing to do anything in order to raise an awful lot of money fast and didn't seem to have to. Well, I mean, he wasn't keen on being tied in with a drug deal, but he probably would have gone through with it if he'd think he'd been able to get away with it.
Sure.
So he's not whiter than white here.
No.
But I do think he was just caught up in something that he really did not want to be in. Or if he'd wanted to profit from it, but at arm's length, I don't think he wanted to be in the room with a suitcase of drugs being threatened by people. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that I think he's the kind of guy, from everything I've read about him, he seems like the kind of guy who will say anything to get what he needs to happen, like I said earlier. And he also is a huge risk taker. So he's great to like start a whole project, but he should not have been like running this company at this point because he takes too many huge sudden risks that are not calculated risks. He's just shooting from the hip. He's like a cowboy, like woo, like,
Yeah.
and you need somebody who's going to like have a more measured approach, like still take risks, but like let's consider the risks and the pros and cons, and get some legal advice in there and get some other people in there. Don't just have like cowboy guy going, let's just make more cars and then they'll give us more money. Like, don't do that, John. What are you doing? Yeah, and I think he just kind of got carried away with like thing after thing, and he was like, I just got to keep going bigger, and that's how he ended up in the room. Like, I don't think that he didn't want to do it with drugs. I think he was just willing to do it with drugs.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So, Back to the Future really saved the car. Like, it would have probably turned into like a weird footnote that car people knew about. People may have kind of remembered it because it's so iconic looking, but this movie really saved it from obscurity, and it's now, if not the most memorable car in history, it's definitely up there. Because, I mean, even having ridden around in one, even little kids who you would think are way too young to have ever even seen Back to the Future, but like everyone turns around and looks at this car. So it's iconic looking, but so many people's faces light up. They're just thrilled to see one. It makes people happy in a way that I can't really express to you. And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to say though, when Michael J. Fox delivers that immortal line, "You made a time machine out of a DeLorean?"
Yeah.
I realized the car was the butt of a joke of some kind.
Sure.
But at that age, in 1985, it just went whoosh, straight over my head. I had no idea what the fuss was. I had no idea.
Right.
So I guess that was playing to the parents. That was playing to the adults in the room.
Yeah, I didn't get it either until I met Michael. Like,
Right.
because of course he educated me about like the whole backstory of the DeLorean and da da da. And I mean, it's so weird. Like the the amount of like I only knew of this car as the thing in Back to the Future, and I think that's how most people are. Um, but like Michael had seen one in the wild as a kid, like I think
Oh,
before he
wow.
even saw the movie, and so he just thought it was a really cool looking car. So he actually kind of fell in love with the car before the movie, and he kind of loves the way it looks without all the time machine junk all over it. And so he just keeps his like stock, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so there's this article. I'm going to sort of go through some of the key points from it. If DeLorean hadn't been arrested in 1982 with a briefcase full of cocaine, the iconic time machine in Back to the Future might have been a fridge, because that was the original script. I know a lot of people probably know that, but it's just such a weird idea to think about the static object. It feels almost like Doctor Who in a weird way. Like, would it have flown through space, or what? What would it have done? Um,
Yeah.
but apparently,
I
Bob's
think it
yeah,
was safety concerns, wasn't it? Weren't they worried about kids climbing into
that was
the?
part of it. Yeah, and then I
Yeah.
think Bob Gale said that Zemeckis, who was involved in all of that too, came up with the great idea of using the DeLorean just because of the way it looks. It's
Yeah.
shiny, and it's stainless steel, and it's just this gorgeous cool looking car. And so Bob Gale has admitted that although the vehicle looked cool on film, it was not a performance car, as we've already kind of talked about. And I wish I could keep playing these clips that Michael made for us, but I'm scared to break the internet again. So but Bob Gale says, it broke down a lot, and little things on the car would break during a scene, and we'd have to wait for the effects guy to repair it. um, it's kind of a nightmare to deal with the car, and I completely get that, like, because it overheats really easily. Michael talked about in one of his clips, like, you can be sitting in traffic, like you're driving a perfectly serviceable, well-running DeLorean, and you're sitting in traffic, and you can literally watch the temperature gauge just going up, because it needs to have airflow
Oh.
and the coolant sort of at the same time moving through it to keep the engine cool. So if you're just sitting stuck in traffic, it's just heating up, heating up, heating up, heating up. And then again, a little bit of fuel leaks out onto the engine block, and it can like catch on fire. Like, there's just
Ah.
it's like this. It's not as bad as the Pinto, I don't think about it, but it has, some of them have caught fire. Um, so the car is always a big hit at car shows, and we've taken the car to cars, not recently, but many many times we've taken it to car shows, and you can be parked next to like a Lamborghini that's like profoundly expensive, and like these amazing European cars, and then have everybody coming over looking at the DeLorean, because it's just so iconic, especially when you have the doors up, right? Like, it
Mm.
just really stands out. And I mean, there are other Gullwing cars, but even still, like, it just, people love it. They love the shiny. They love the whole Back to the Future thing. It just makes people happy. Um, I wanted to I had asked Michael in a clip, which is really fun, but I can tell you the answer. So there are things that you hear 500,000 times if you have a DeLorean and you take it to a car show. So I just wanted to share some of those with you. The first one being, if you don't have one in the car, which Michael has back here, I don't know if you can really see it, but he has a flux capacitor. And the reason that he has a flux capacitor that fluxes is because the first thing where's the flux capacitor? Like, it's the first thing. And I swear to God, every one of these people thinks that they're the first person to come up with that. The next thing is,
Yeah.
they'll come up to you and they'll be like, is this thing made out of aluminum? Which is, how Americans say aluminium. And you're just like, no, it's stainless. It's stainless steel. And the other thing, like, I have to point out about this is, like, I literally remember this guy coming up to us. He was like eating a ham sandwich with all this mayonnaise on it, and it was like on his
Ew.
hands, and he literally touched the car. Does this thing get a lot of fingerprints on it? Like, people
But
love to just touch your car. Like, they love to touch the DeLorean more than any other car, I swear. And the other thing is, people, and this is true probably of any classic car, any car that you take somewhere, you leave the doors open, people will invariably plop their butts down into the driver's seat without asking. And if, there's all the problems that I talked about before with, the car can't support really heavy people. They don't have any way of getting out of it because you don't realize how low it is. And then you're pulling on the, thing to get out. And it's just like, it's crazy. There's something about it. People just want to sit in it. And then the third one is, that they used to smuggle cocaine in the doors of these cars, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the whole cocaine thing literally happened after the company was already defunct and the cars were already built. So that's, even if you think that he is a drug smuggler, it's just the timing doesn't add up, right? Like it was a Hail Mary after the car company was already seized. And he was thinking he could maybe give Maggie Thatcher the money and get the company back.
Yeah, and I don't think Belfast was a major routeway for cocaine.
I guess it would have been if...
No, I don't think that's where it's coming from.
No, I don't think so. So, and then I thought this was a fun thing to share. So, there are at least 39 different DeLorean clubs today, all kinds of events that keep people interested in the car and keep people talking about it. So I have a few of these. The one on the bottom right is us at the screening of Back to the Future at the Plaza Theater down in Atlanta a few years ago. The one on the left is us recreating on the same time and date. I think it's like at 1:21 a.m. The whole chase scene in the JCPenney parking lot. We found a guy who had like a VW bus that was like the one from the movie. And we literally went out to the parking lot at like 1:15. And luckily the security guy was pretty cool because I think we had called ahead and like said, we're just going to be filming this. We're not going to be messing with the building. We're just going to be, doing this car chase scene. So we drove around the parking lot and kind of pretended to chase each other for a while and filmed it. It was really fun. Yeah. And then the 25th anniversary of Back to the Future reunion was done in North Alabama in March of 2010. So we met like James Tolkan and the first girlfriend that you never can remember the name. I think is it Claudia Wells? That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. So she was there, a bunch of people, and they sat in the car, and they were fine sitting in the car. But yeah, so that was fun. And, there were a bunch of other people who had time machine DeLoreans there too. So, you can go and be around all these other folks who have them, and there are collectors clubs and stuff like that. And it's just kind of a fun hobby type of thing that people, they'll do stuff for charity as well. So it's just kind of a great thing. And I just wanted to end on the comment that a lot of people say, the DeLorean it's not really a fast car. And it's not really known for being super fast, but Michael has this comeback to that I love. And I've always thought it was a great comeback. He says, this is a car you want to drive slowly and let people enjoy seeing it. Like you want to be seen in this car. You don't want to go by too fast. So I kind of love that because it's true. You really do want people to be able to enjoy and have their face light up when they see the car. So it's kind of a bummer, everything that happened with John DeLorean. He never really fully recovered after all of the lawsuit and all that stuff. But I think something positive did ultimately kind of come out of it.
Yeah. We have a great icon from our childhoods that, you might fleetingly get to see one day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to switch over here and look at some of these wonderful super chats that Michael and Tony, who are both upstairs, Tony from Analog Toys, is here in our house, believe it or not. And they've been upstairs starring comments that you guys have been making. So I'm going to read some of those now. Jason Anderson says, I forget, did the DeLorean come with a little hammer to knock out the windshield if it flipped on its roof like a Lamborghini? No, I think it just was you're supposed to kick it out. So much more dramatic, right?
Yeah.
KBA says, now that Melinda has pointed out the Three's Company thing, I can't unsee it. You're welcome. Jace Anderson says, a chin plant? Yes, that's exactly
yes.
Jason says Michael's opinion as a DeLorean owner is probably punctuated with swear words and scraped knuckles. He did notoriously punch a hole in the wall of the garage one day because he just got so frustrated. I think it was related to that coolant flush, if memory serves. But Jason says about, I guess, assuming he's talking about DeLorean, he looks like he smells like my grandpa's sock drawer.
But see, this just brings me a whole host of questions like, what is Jason doing face down in his grandpa's sock drawer?
That's a really good follow-up question, Conrad. And don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to.
No.
KBA says, this makes me really want to see you guys do an episode about Ted Turner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He also says, the American auto industry was a little slow to adapt to the 70s gas shortages, price hikes, and I can't remember what IIRC means, but it's internet speak for something.
If I recall correctly, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, they were very stodgy. They were very set in their ways, and they wore their little gray suits and their little white shirts. And, you had Flashy Flash DeLorean with his Larry from Three's Company style. They just did not like that. Map Film Production says, it's ironic. In Australia, we got our best V8s and muscle cars during the mid-70s when you guys were giving it up. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, we still had muscle cars. Like, and like I had a Camaro that was like an 82 Camaro. And I mean, it was a V8 and it was so great. So Wolfie says, oh God, I love that factory stripe. Yeah, the stripe down the side. Banazir Galpsy 1968 says, we need to make special very firm seat cushion for Melinda for the DeLorean. Oh yeah. I need a phone book, aka something that John DeLorean created, to sit on to be able to see over the top. Jason says, instead of short speedometers encourage you to bury the needle. Instead, short speedometers encourage you to bury the needle. I see. Okay.
Yeah. Push it to 11, as I said. Yeah.
Right. King Eric says, did Michael find his car in a cave with a tarp over it? No, it had been garaged, like pretty much after, like it only had 2,000 original miles on it when he bought it. And it had been in a garage since the guy bought it. Like, and I think it was in California, and then it got somebody in Connecticut had it in a showroom, like inside of an actual showroom. And so when he bought the car, he flew up on a one-way ticket to Connecticut and had never driven the car before, and was like, he likes to point out like the fact that it doesn't have power steering, which was very challenging. He gets in the car to drive it out of the showroom, which is very stressful. Never driven this car before. And he's about to drive it all the way back to Atlanta from Connecticut. And
wow.
He rolls it out of there and there's no power steering. And so, which is fine if you're at speed, but if you're going really slow, it's like you're turning this little steering wheel that's like really hard to turn. And he's like, oh my God, is this car messed up? But no, that's just the way the car was. So
that was brave. I mean, I thought I was brave when I switched from geared to automatic. So to drive a DeLorean, having never sat in one before, and I guess that's quite a few miles as well.
Oh, it's quite a long way. Yes, I can't remember how many miles it is, but it's he and this is a manual, a stick shift. The DeLorean is. His is. Yeah. A lot of them are not, but his is, and so the clutch is also a challenge. Like you are working for it. He also, it's funny because he had a tape that he had made like with a mixtape to play all these 80s songs like on it for his road trip. Of course, the tape deck is like,
oh no.
So I think he found a way to play an MP3 player thing. I'm pretty sure that's right. KBA says, DeLorean, no fatties allowed. Map Film Production says, ironically, Johnny Carson, who was a backer of the DeLorean, got caught out being stuck in his DeLorean and had to be freed. Yeah. His DeLorean, like, there were a lot of famous people who were really into the car, him being one, and it didn't always work out great. Jason says that window opening does not support modern McDonald's drive-through big bag sizes. No.
No, again, see, no fatties allowed.
No. And I mean, honestly, Michael will tell you, like, anytime you're at a drive-through or even a toll booth, they're called toll booth windows, but you just open the door. Like, it's that little window is not really at the right height to do anything. Maki Shepherd says, I thought it was a beautiful car. Yes, definitely is. Let's see. Jason Anderson says, do like your cars and stall. Is a response to his lawyer telling him to, like, drag it out a little while. Yeah, so Action Pop Dad says, I used to go to a lot of performance car shows in the UK. You do not touch another person's car. Well, that's actually true in America too, but you also have Americans there. And so they just, some of, like, people who go to car shows regularly know that rule and don't touch. And there are signs to tell you don't touch cars, but people are just, I mean, they're just people. I don't know if you have that happen at all over there, but yeah. Tim Hayes says, some guy got mayo on Michael's car. I bet Michael was ready to smack him. Yeah, he was not happy, but he wasn't nearly as upset as he was on our second date when someone rear-ended us while we were in the DeLorean.
Oh, I bet that was difficult to fix.
Yeah, well, it was, luckily it just messed up the bumper, which is a replaceable part with some of those many, many parts that are in DeLorean, at the DeLorean company that's out in Texas now.
Oh, okay.
And so he was able to get another. He actually repaired his bumper, and now he has a spare as well, just because it's always good to have a spare.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the super chats.
Yes. Thanks, everyone.
Yes,
it's always great to hear from you.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up this episode of Dreamland. You will be able to find our show notes with all the links to all of our sources at retroblasting.com/Dreamland. And we will be back in June with our next show. Conrad, what is our title?
So our title for our next episode is Milk. So,
Milk?
Yeah, start guessing, everyone.
I'll post a link to that very weird title, and we will let you guess what we'll be talking about next time. Until then, you can follow me and Conrad on Retroblasting and Movie Oubliette, respectively, on all social media outlets, and you can email us at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.